Next guy has been around the block a few times, and then a few times more. Mike Vanderbough of Pinson, Alabama, has been a Second Amendment advocate for more than 20 years. He's way ahead of most of us. A blogger and a citizen journalist, he broke the Fast and Furious scandal story with the help of Guns Magazine columnist David Cordrea in December of 2010. Y'all remember the Fast and Furious debacle? Our government running guns over into Mexico? He was also responsible for linking up the ATF whistleblowers with Senators Sessions and Grassley, as well as Cheryl Atkinson of CBS News. Mike is also the founder of the National 3% Movement, and he will be speaking today on the national firearms rights movement and how Alabama fits into the big picture. Please welcome Mike Vanderbough.
Teddy. Wow. I got to warn you ahead of time, I'm not very good at this. I got the Obama disease. I got to read my speech. Earlier, somebody asked, if there's any members of the Shelby County Sheriff's Department here. And at the time, I thought, I got a question. Any federal snitches here? Would you raise your hand, please? I don't object. I just always like to know who I'm speaking to. I was glad to hear Jan Morgan from Arkansas. My second and last wife, Rosie, is from Arkansas. She told me very quickly when I met her 30 years ago that Arkansas girls don't divorce. They commit homicide, so I'm with her till I die one way or the other. It's important to know that going in, though. I have another riff that I do about my first wife, the Wicked Witch of the North, but I'll spare you that for now. I'm kind of short on time anyway. Well, I'm here today to brief you on the National Firearms Rights Movement, on where we are and where we're headed. And the news is not good. What I am about to say is unpleasant, and many of you will not like it. I don't like it myself. The only thing I can tell you is that it's the unvarnished truth. If you feel better being spoon-fed horse crap and wishful thinking, you should have invited somebody else. Wayne LaPierre, maybe. Alan Gottlieb, somebody like that. I try to wrap this up as fast as I can. We might have chances for questions, but if not, just see me afterwards. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. You may thank the Lord that you are Alabamians by birth and Southern by the grace of God. This accident of lineage and location has shielded your liberty, your property, and your lives from a predatory state government. We have had the luxury here today of discussing how to move the cause of firearms rights forward here in Alabama. That is, we can just get past the boss hogs and the Roscoe P. Coltrane's of the Alabama Sheriff's Association, who are more concerned about preserving their petty powers and their gravy train of the current permit system than they are about our God-given liberty or the constitutional oaths that they themselves swore before the Almighty to uphold. So count yourselves lucky. For the last 2 years, I've been traveling behind enemy lines to states whose citizens are not so lucky. And behind enemy lines sounds like a comic exaggeration, but believe me, it is not. In such states as Connecticut, New York, Maryland, Colorado, and most recently Washington State, the authorities have passed a series of intolerable acts banning and registering firearms and magazines, and yes, even registering their owners. But that is what permits and background checks are really all about. Why worry about registering firearms when you can register their owners? After all, it's those potential troublemakers the government is really interested in controlling, not crime, not criminals. Oh no. They are interested in controlling you. They are interested in controlling us, all of us, in controlling us and stripping us of our power to resist their appetites for our liberty, our property, and yes, our lives. You know, Rudy Giuliani got in trouble the other day for daring to say that he didn't believe Barack Obama loved his country. Now, I don't pretend to know what evils reside in the innermost being of Barack Obama. Only God knows that. But I will venture to defend the president on this point. I think Barack Obama loves his country. No, I really do. I really do. The problem is that his country and our country are two different countries. We share a common border and mostly a common language. But we are divided along the answers to the question, to this eternal question. Does the government serve the people or do the people serve the government? In Barack Obama's country, people exist to serve the government. In our country, the government exists to serve the people, mostly by staying out of our way and leaving us the heck alone. This is how the founders intended it. It is why they gave us a constitutional republic of limited powers securing the rule of law, not the rule of man, not the rule of a man, no matter how many of his fellow citizens consider him a demigod and blindly vote his tyranny into power. We are two countries, ladies and gentlemen. And the sooner you recognize that fact, the clearer everything else becomes. Barack Obama loves his country. We love our country. The only question is which vision, which country, which answer to that existential question is to prevail. Do the people serve the government? Or does the government serve the people? What do you think? Come on, what do you think? Oh, come on. You think they're going to hear that? You got to make it loud. Who does the government serve? All right, you guys are a lot weaker than them Yankees. I'm really ashamed of you. I'm serious. But if we are honest enough to admit that we inhabit two different countries with two mutually exclusive worldviews, then let us be honest enough to call the people on the other side by their proper description in language that the founders would understand, indeed in their own words that they left us with so long ago. When someone declares his appetite for your liberty and your property at the threat of naked government force against your very life, and takes steps to make that happen in contradiction to the Constitution and the rule of law that the founders crafted, then such people should be called by what they plainly are, domestic enemies of the Constitution. Let us be honest enough, at least, for that. For there is no other way to accurately describe it. The people who pass these laws hateful to God-given natural and inalienable rights know exactly what they are about. They know what they want, regardless of whatever soft lie of the moment they wrap their naked ambition in, no matter what velvet glove they cover the iron fist of predatory government with. What they want is power. Power over you, power over me. power to tell the rest of us what to do, how to act, even what to think. But standing in their way, as the founders intended, is us, the armed citizenry of the Republic of the United States. And so they have set out to disarm us, to strip us of our weapons if they can, but in any case to persuade us that resistance is futile. For if we swallow that lie, we'll have lost the battle before it begins, and the weapons that we own will mean nothing without the will to use them. So the first battleground of this war between the collectivists and ourselves is between our own ears, where lies attack the truth and fears can immobilize principle. We have the power, they say. We won an election, so we have the power. Do what we say or else. To which I would reply, or else what? Think about that. For the truth is that the rule of law protects them from us far more than it protects us from them. And they should try to remember that when democracy turns to tyranny, the armed citizenry still gets to vote. They are learning this enduring truth, these domestic enemies of the Constitution, in states such as Connecticut. They are being taught this lesson by a determined minority of their own citizens who have declared they will not comply with unconstitutional laws. They will not comply, no matter what promise of state violence threatens them for their noncompliance. How do I know this? Because these same people, from Connecticut to Massachusetts to New York to Colorado and Washington State, invited me into their homes. They take me in, letting me spend the night, knowing that they will be moved up on the list they're already on or added to another. They do it knowing that it may cost them everything. And they do it anyway. They will not comply. And you know what? The proto-tyrants who issue their diktats don't know whether to defecate or go blind. A good example of this is in Connecticut. And after numerous trips up north behind those particular enemy lines, I am still amazed at how these new practitioners of the art of armed civil disobedience, I'm speechless sometimes. They are few, they are brave, they are magnificent in their defiance. Who knew that Yankees still had it in them? But they do. The founders themselves would be proud of these people. You may recall that right after Sandy Hook, the state legislature up there passed a law mandating the registration of all semi-automatic rifles and even their magazines. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of rifles and perhaps millions of magazines. The penalty for noncompliance was a Class D felony. And what happened? 2 years ago this April, in the aftermath of that law, I spoke at a huge rally on the steps of their state capitol. And I told those assembled that if the state wanted to make them criminals, that they should embrace that fact and try to be the best, most successful criminals they could be. I urged them to defy, resist, evade, and smuggle in resistance to that law. And as evidence of my seriousness of purpose that day, I announced to the crowd that I myself had smuggled in 30-round AR-15 magazines in defiance of that ban. You got a round of applause. I dared the authorities to arrest me. Of course, surrounded as I was by thousands of armed Connecticut citizens, that probably wasn't the smartest thing they could have done at that moment, so they didn't. But I had the luxury of flouting their law and then coming home to the great free state of Alabama. My audience didn't. They were stuck behind enemy lines. And what happened? The deadline for registration came and went, and it was estimated there was an 85% non-compliance rate. 85% in Connecticut. New York was jealous. They later claimed a 90% non-compliance rate, and they probably did. They got sheriffs up there that threatened to arrest state authorities if they come into their counties and try to bust people on the new SAFE Act. Perhaps as many as 100,000 Connecticut firearms owners, perhaps more, simply refused to comply. They said, like Leonidas at Thermopylae and the Texans at Gonzales, come and take them. The state government blustered, made threats of gun raids, and then did exactly nothing. Nothing. Of course, part of their calculation may have been that yours truly published a list of the legislators who had voted for this intolerable act on my blog, along with their home addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses. And you know what? They didn't react well to that. Not one little bit. You know, it seems, and it's a funny thing to me, but it seems that people who like to put people on lists don't like to be on lists themselves. Go figure. Who knew? Of course, they did open a criminal investigation on me for that and for my continued smuggling activities in defiance of their law. At last count, we have smuggled about between 250 and 300 what we call freedom fighter magazines into the state of Connecticut. That doesn't include what we call our politician grade magazines, which do not function, that we send to them just to sort of twitch them and say, well, you got a magazine, now why don't you go arrest yourself? However, although they opened an investigation on me, it actually used the local county sheriff's office to try to get in touch with me. In desperation, they were trying to call me. And of course, I saw the ID on the phone. I wasn't about to incriminate myself in any way, so I didn't answer the phone. They actually sent a deputy to my front door on a Saturday. I said, you know, this fellow up in Connecticut, he wants to talk to you about it. Well, you really don't expect me to call him, do you? And the deputy said, no, we actually think it's pretty funny down at the station. So late last year, I went back to Connecticut to attend a gun show, and I told everyone on the blog, I'm coming. And frankly, I was trying to give them a chance to arrest me. You know what happened? Exactly nothing. Now, I'm probably going back there this coming April, which marks the 2 years since the beginning of the armed civil disobedience movement in Connecticut. So they will have another chance to arrest me. But here's the thing. Since the enactment of the law, the state government has been looking at 100,000 of its own citizens over rifle barrels. Those are the state police and those of their previously law-abiding citizens. Beyond empty promises to the firearm confiscation lobby and occasional growling, the authorities have not dared to enforce their diktat. They have not dared. Has that stopped their appetite for their fellow citizens' liberty and property? Oh, hell no. Here is a portion of the final report of the Sandy Hook Commission. It just came out last week. And what do they further demand? Why, the registration of all firearms, the banning of all so-called assault weapons and their magazines, the state screening of all firearms owners, and here's my personal favorite on page 59, quote, require that any shell casing for ammunition sold or possessed in Connecticut have a serial number laser etched on it for tracing purposes, unquote. I kid you not. I kid you not. This is an official government document of the state of Connecticut. But of course, that begs the question. If your state government is afraid to enforce the hateful laws you already have on the books, what's the point of passing more onerous laws? The firearms owners of Connecticut have already nullified these laws by armed civil disobedience. Is it the intention of this state commission to actually enforce even more onerous and unconstitutional laws to the point where they provoke a civil war? How many of our lives and those of our families and other innocents is it worth to these collectivists to enforce their appetites upon us? 1,000, 100,000, 1,000,000, 6 million, 10? How many of us are they willing to see dead to achieve their purposes? And the armed citizens of Connecticut, who are yet free and intend to remain so, they live with this question every day, wondering what the answer will be. Every day they go home, they have to wonder if their home has been invaded, their property confiscated while they were away. Every night they go to sleep, they have to wonder if tonight is the night that the state will send armed men paid by their own tax dollars to work the tyrant's will upon them and their innocent families. So like I said, consider yourself lucky to be living in Alabama. These questions need not trouble your sleep, but they should. They should, because what happens in Connecticut or in any other state now behind enemy lines will not stay in Connecticut. In a short time, it will come here to visit you. For if the state of Connecticut should decide to go to war with its own citizens, then the authorities will find out quickly what it was like for Custer at Little Bighorn. And they will have but one alternative, and that is to call upon the federal government to send its militarized police, and indeed the military itself, to come help them attack their own people. And then, this is not entirely, unexplored territory. Back in the 90s, when I was in the constitutional militia movement, the FBI, in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing and with the Freeman standoff happening in Montana, became extremely solicitous of the intentions of those of us who had sworn there would be no more free Wacos. In the middle of this, the FBI special agent in charge of the Albuquerque, New Mexico field office met with a good friend of mine, Bob Wright of Lee County. Bob was a militia leader of national reputation and commanded the 1st Brigade of New Mexico Militia. And after some preliminary fencing, the SAC got down to the question that he needed to know the answer to. Bobby asked, if this Montana thing turns out badly like Waco, would you really take your unit up there to fight us? Now, you should understand, we had no love for the Freemen. In our eyes, they were petty criminals who had victimized their neighbors. But we also determined, we had sworn to ourselves and to our God that the federal government would enjoy no more free Wacos. We viewed the freemen as proper subjects of state police enforcement. And for us, the FBI poised to carry out another Waco was intolerable. So when the FBI SAC asked Bob if he would take his unit to Montana if things went south, close quote, old Bob looked him in the eye and said, why would I want to do that? There's plenty of you federal sons of bitches around here. Now, this was an aspect of the situation that the FBI had not apparently previously considered, and witnesses reported that his eyes grew wide and his jaw dropped a bit. In the end, we didn't have to find out. Just like at the Bundy Ranch this past April, we didn't have to find out, although the Bundy Ranch was a much more close-run thing than the Freeman. But the Bundy situation bore all the hallmarks of Waco: federal militarized police abuse, the demonization and isolation of the intended target, and that is why it got the response from an aroused armed citizenry that it did. Those of us who went out to Bunkerville didn't necessarily believe that Bundy was right, but we knew that whatever his conflict with the federal government, it didn't excuse another Waco. That we got another Freeman result and not a Waco result, however, was, as I know from being there, mere chance. For we are, as I said, two countries. And that question has yet to be answered. But just like Bundy Ranch, a shooting war in Connecticut or Colorado or New York or Washington State would not be a local affair. It would start a bloody civil war in the entire nation, and that civil war would, in short order, come to visit us here. These are not pleasant thoughts. They are the reality that has been growing in this country for some time. Although it has hardly been reported by the so-called mainstream media. But then, the Fast and Furious scandal, which I had the humbling duty and honor to break the story with the help of my friends back in December 2010, was largely ignored by the media as well. It didn't mean it wasn't the truth. And the truth is that civil war is possible precisely because the possibility of such a conflict is not being reported. Precisely because people, especially people on the other side, do not think it is possible because, well, this is America and it's the 21st century and things like that can't happen anymore, can they? I assure you that they can. To believe otherwise is to whistle past the graveyard of our own history. I'm currently reading a remarkable book called An Empire on the Edge, How Britain Came to Fight America by the English historian Nick Bunker. Bunker points out that while Lexington and Concord came as a surprise to many, there were a small number of both American colonists and Britons who foresaw the possibility and would not shrink from it. Nathaniel Greene, later one of Washington's great generals, wrote as early as July 1774, quote, "Soon, very soon, expect to hear the thirsty earth drinking in the blood of American sons." That was a full 9 months before Captain Parker's demonstration of armed civil disobedience to the British coming down that road from Boston. The one that led to the shot heard round the world. Commenting on Nathaniel Greene's prediction, Bunker writes, "In the 18th century, treason could take many forms, with the sword or with the pen. Long before General Gates arrived in Boston, and even with the war a year away, we find young patriots in America already committing lines to paper that might have sent them to the gallows if any British spy had read them." You know, I'm reliably informed that Eric Holder's Justice Department has had a sedition investigation going on me since before I broke Fast and Furious. The Coalition to Stop Gun Violence has called me an insurrectionist. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, a misnamed and misbegotten bunch of liars for money, if there ever was one, has long had me on their list of dangerous folks. I have even been the subject of an 18-and-a-half-minute rant by Rachel Madcow on MSNBC. And Bill Clinton, that paragon of moral virtue, has denounced the 3% movement that I founded in a speech on national television. Well, as my friend Kurt Hoffman says, it is better to be despised by the despicable than admired by the admirable. But the fact of the matter is that this Cold War I described between the federal government and its citizens has been going on for 20 years now. And I am proud to say that I've been on the enemy's list of the last 3 White Houses, irrespective of party. I am at least an equal opportunity gadfly. But despite the name calling by the other side, I am not seeking an insurrection nor soliciting civil war, but I am trying to prevent one. The men and women behind enemy lines, who now that every other means of defending their essential liberties have failed and have turned to armed civil disobedience, are trying to prevent one as well. Only by convincing the other side of the seriousness of our purpose and the credibility of our deterrence will we avoid one. Again, these are dark and bloody thoughts, but they are not new for some of us. Back in January 2009, I had been working on the David Olafson case and other ATF scandals when one day in my post office box I received an anonymous envelope. It was postmarked from somewhere in Oklahoma, and it said this in handwritten block letters, quote, "Sir, I have read you on the internet and believe in what you are doing. One day the ATF will come to count coup on you and take your head. I promise to take 100 heads for yours." And he signed it, Cheyenne 0317/8541. There was a small, delicate ink drawing on the bottom of the sheet showing what appeared to be a coup stick crossed with a tomahawk overarched with eagle feathers. 0317/8541, for the uninitiated, are the current and former MOS numbers for a Marine Corps Scout sniper. 100 heads. I sat in the car reading and rereading this piece of paper, touched and frankly shaken by its simple sincerity. I had no doubt the man meant what he said. It is a token of the power of the written word to evoke such a response. I also had no doubt that a Marine Scout sniper had the skills to take 100 heads if, God forbid, this should come to guns. I shared this with a friend at the time, and he had only this blunt comment: 100 heads properly targeted could finish this thing. Indeed. Now, I did with this what I always do. I wrote about it on my blog, 60 Street Irregulars, and it became somewhat of a dark running joke, albeit a deadly serious one, and it sort of picked up a life of its own. One reader embraced the idea and crafted a T-shirt reading 100 Heads Life and Casualty Company with a little mound of skulls in the center. And then, stranger still, I would go places, speeches and rallies and gun shows, even the NRA convention. And people would come up to me and shake my hand and say, 100 heads, sir. And then they'd walk away. It wasn't a discussion they were seeking. It was a declaration of intent. It wasn't approval they were looking for. It was just, well, a valediction. Now, for the honoree, this is quite a two-edged sword, for the action promised, you may recall, is predicated on his own, my own, demise. Yet it is somehow strangely comforting that my life has been insured these past 6 years by the entirely voluntary and absolutely free of charge 100 Heads Life and Casualty Company. Who knows? Maybe it's one reason I'm still alive. We have since, by popular demand, begun selling 100 Heads life insurance ball caps in order to raise money for the Armed Civil Disobedience campaign. Some of them are on sale over at my table here, since they closed down outside, along with these Fight Tyranny, Shoot Back hats, if and only if you are looking for headgear that comes with a free personal FBI file at no extra charge. But I offer this story, which, like all the best stories, has the advantage of being true, as evidence that some of us, like Nathaniel Greene and his contemporaries of the Founders' generation, have been thinking about this sort of thing for a while. If a civil war breaks out in Connecticut or in Washington State tomorrow, we at least will not be surprised, horrified, saddened like everyone else, but not surprised. And neither should you be. I mention Washington State because that is where the latest front of armed civil disobedience has been opened. Back in November, you may recall, Michael Bloomberg and some other millionaires bought themselves a mandatory background check law by referendum called I-594. Now, the so-called mainstream gun rights organizations had only themselves to blame for this fiasco because they couldn't restrain their petty jealousies and refused to work together lest the other group get the credit for the win. And I'm talking here about the NRA and Alan Gottlieb's bunch. The only thing was, instead of claiming credit for the win, they lost. We all lost. Now, immediately, though, there sprung up an I Will Not Comply organization that held a rally on the 13th of December to not only protest the new law, but to break it and to dare the state authorities to do anything about it. They were initially granted, then denied a permit. And they said, fine, we don't need no stinking permits. We're still going to have our rally. We'll arrest you, the state police threatened. So they told the state police, hey, you do what you got to do, and we'll do what we got to do, and it's your move. Say again? Oh, I just got a couple more pages here. I hope they'll bear with me. I put it to a vote. I was honored to be invited to speak in front of a group that I estimated at 2,000 folks. The Washington State Police said it was more like 1,800, but I'm not going to quibble. It still made it one of the largest firearms rights demonstrations ever held in the state. We gathered, armed. We broke the law, and nothing happened. We were even congratulated by the state police for the professional manner with which we carried out the protest. Last month, I went back to Olympia to help with another armed civil disobedience action after the state legislature banned firearms from the galleries. Again, they threatened to arrest us. Again, we said, fine, you do what you got to do. And what did they do? They locked the gallery doors on us. In a word, they wimped out. So we trooped, about 100 of us, who gathered on a day of awful weather through the State House, served our list of grievances by taping them to the gallery and the governor's office doors, and then marched over to the governor's mansion where we startled the gate guard by presenting the same petition to him. Then, having knelt in prayer, we adjourned. Now, in the process of all this law breaking, the Washington activists presented me with this. all firearms being female, meet Mrs. Bloomberg. I call her Charlotte when no one else is listening. She's named for Michael Bloomberg's mother. It seemed only fitting that if I was breaking Bloomberg's law, that I at least give a tip of the boonie hat to the nanny state fascists who motivated me to do so. It is my intention to tote Charlotte around every other armed civil disobedience event and speaking engagement that I engage in from now on. Naked as she is. And the next one in Washington State ought to be a doozy. You see, the armed civil disobedience resistors out there are hosting an arms expo late in June, a background check free gun show. And they are again daring the authorities to do anything about it. And I'll be there toting Mrs. Bloomberg and daring right along with them. Armed civil disobedience has a long, honorable history in America. From Captain Parker to the Battle of Athens in 1946, to the Deacons for Defense and Justice during the Civil Rights Movement, to the Bundy Ranch standoff, Americans have been opposing government-sanctioned violence by putting their own bodies on the line with determination in their hearts and firearms in their hands. This is no surprise to Black Americans, who, like Condoleezza Rice's father, stood armed guard over Martin Luther King while that advocate of Gandhian nonviolence slept here in Birmingham, made safe from Klan violence and Sheriff Bull Connor's Klan member deputies by their 38 revolvers and their 45 automatics. Throughout our history, Americans have been a practical people. And when the regular means of sustaining our rights and our liberties have failed, we have always turned to our own resources. Is it dangerous? You bet. Is it desirable? No way. But it is sometimes required. You live in a free state. But there are people in this country who do not. There are people who, thanks to the domestic enemies of the Constitution in their states, now live behind enemy lines. You may disagree with them. You may condemn them. They may make you nervous. They may make the authorities nervous. Heck, they make me nervous. But they are meant to. As Jefferson observed, when the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. But remember, whatever you think of them, these armed civil disobedience activists, you sleep safe at night, safe from the arbitrary exercise of government violence. They do not. But however you react to them, they are there. They are not going away. And the conflict that their oppressive state governments force on them will likely come to your door, to our doors anyway. If it happens, accidentally or intentionally, it will come to all of our doors. This is the new reality, the new paradigm. And this is something, frankly, that Wayne LaPierre won't tell you a thing about. Neither will the media. The NRA would like to see their money flow continue. They would like everyone to believe that the country still works the way we all thought it should be in civics class. And folks, it doesn't. It just slap doesn't. This is the state of our two countries. The one that Barack Obama loves and the one that we love. And they will tell you, these resistors, they will say to anyone, including Barack Obama, if he asks, that if you don't like it, you better ease up out of their faces. Get your hands out of their pockets, off their property and liberty as the founders intended before something goes wrong. Be careful what you wish for, they will quote the old Chinese adage, because you may get it. As for me, I'm honored to stand beside them, these brave men and women behind enemy lines. I am honored and I'm humbled. But I will stand with them until God, according to his own plan, calls me home. And I thank you. And remember, folks, fight tyranny, shoot back.